Well, good morning. We all know how difficult it is to find a professional in the therapeutic community that truly understands narcissistic personality disorder. Yes, we all know the stories of narcissism is self-love, or we're told to work on ourselves first without any validation. I was fortunate enough to come across a specific professional in the therapeutic community, Dr. Ramani Durvasula. And Dr. Durvasula is a licensed clinical psychologist and also a professor of psychology. Along with numerous television appearances, Dr. Ramani is the author of Should I Stay or Should I Go? Surviving a Relationship with a Narcissist. I asked Dr. Ramani to spend a few moments with us together today, and that we could all benefit, hopefully, in understanding what this is, why it happens, and how we can survive and become more happy and enjoy a better mental health after being abused from a narcissist. Dr. Ramani, good morning, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure.
This is very much a pleasure and an honor as well on our end. Now, as you know, I run a YouTube channel, and it's a community of survivors of narcissistic abuse. And what I've learned from these wonderful people is helped me a great, great deal. And we're working out issues together. I came across your book as well as your writings. You have a wonderful blog, by the way.
Thank you.
And a light bulb went off. And I realized this is a psychologist, a professional, that really gets what narcissism is about. It's not about self-love. It's a horrific, terrific personality disorder. And you're one of the very few who gets right to the core, who gets right to it, doesn't pull any punches, and discusses what narcissism truly is. So, if you don't mind, Doctor, what I'd like to do is have a conversation, ask a few questions, and go from there. Is that okay with you?
Sounds great.
And by the way, I'm going to have Dr. Ramani's information in the description section below, as well as a link to her book and her website. And I strongly suggest that you read her blog as well. It's not only helpful, but it's very informative. So, Doctor, if I could start, the first question I have, and when I say I pretty much mean we, the community. The first question that we have is, we all have one common experience, is why are there so few therapists in the professional community that do not have true understanding or true skills of narcissism or how to help or treat the victims of narcissistic personality disorder?
I think that, first of all, narcissism and narcissistic personality disorder, that whole set of issues, they're very complex and they're very nuanced. And frankly, I often think it's a training issue, that there should be an entire course sequence on personality disorders, on how to measure them, how to treat them. But I got to tell you, because they're so difficult to measure and to treat, a lot of graduate programs almost turn their head away from them and say, well, that's a lot to take on, or we don't even know if these disorders exist because they're not easily measurable. And as a researcher, I can say, yeah, that may be true. But at the end of the day, if you do not teach people about this, they're not going to be able to help people with it. That's number one. Number two, I do think that so much of what happens in therapy is there's such a focus, and there needs to be, on the responsibility of the client, that there are many therapists who don't understand the dynamics of this disorder, having not been taught it properly, and then, of course, not being forced to read about it. And as a result, I think that they don't always help the client sort of have a context of understanding what just happened to me. Because what the client gets used to, you know this in all of your listeners know this. When you're in a relationship with somebody who's a narcissist or has full-blown narcissistic personality disorder, over the weeks, the days, the months, the years, you learn to blame yourself for everything. This isn't an issue about taking responsibility. These clients already take too much responsibility. But without giving that context, and again, if you don't understand these disorders, you can't give that context, I think we put too much onus on, well, just forget about that. Like, let's pretend that never happened, which is ridiculous. It defined this person reflexively for the rest of their lives. So I think that a lot of that is literally a misunderstanding. But my final concern about how mental health in our world works is, listen, I'm the first one who believes in the growth and the potential in every human being. But I'm also the first one to know that we sometimes have to call it quits. And personality disorders, particularly narcissism, narcissistic personality disorder, psychopathy, or antisocial personality disorder, these disorders are incredibly resistant to change. And if you got a bunch of psychologists in a room and shut us all in privately, we'd all admit it. My problem is that it's almost like the dirty little secret of mental health. Let's not tell them that these people can't change, because then I don't know what that means. I don't know if that means that our income streams would be cut. I don't think that's the case at all. I still think that there's good work that can be done within narcissism, but my work is more on the survivor end. My work is more on the end of the people who've been victimized by these folks. And in that world, I think it's really critical. I think, to me, the intervention is telling the person who's been victimized by this person, they're not going to change. They're not going to change. And so I think there's an unwillingness in the field sometimes to accept that. And while I will acknowledge that I've heard anecdotal and very, very rare cases of people with pathological narcissism or narcissistic personality disorder making significant changes, they are incredibly rare. And usually there are contexts around that person, like an incredible experience in their lives that occurs, a major loss, a major illness, or what we might even proverbially refer to as like a come to Jesus moment that happens for that person. You can't construct those for people in treatment. They happen or they don't, and the person runs with them or they don't. In the significant majority, if not almost all cases, it doesn't turn the person, and in fact, sometimes it makes the narcissist even worse. So I think that the unwillingness to accept that makes it very difficult to find a mental health provider. And I'll be frank with you, when I make referrals, because obviously I practice in California, and people from all over the country, all over the world actually, have been getting in touch with me after I've written this book. When I make referrals, I'm very careful to ensure that I try to make a referral to somebody who understands narcissism, and there aren't many people who do, so it's hard for me to make those referrals because I'm concerned I'm throwing someone into the viper's pit. You know, they go in with a therapist who doesn't quite understand the disorder.
Is there a healthy narcissism?
People ask about that, and I write about that in the book. I don't like calling it healthy narcissism because I think narcissism from the jump is already an unhealthy trait. So I prefer calling it healthy self-advocacy. I like calling it self-respect because we all at times do need to advocate for ourselves. We do need sometimes to put our needs first. Sometimes we do need to say no, and none of us should ever be a doormat, okay? So I do think that that's very important. And people will say, well, aren't we all somewhat narcissistic? No, I think some of us advocate for ourselves. I think it's important that a person values themselves and look in the mirror in the morning and say, I look like $1 million today, or I did really well of writing that report. I think we're so wedded in this culture, many of us, to the idea of pride goes before a fall, that we learn to be self-effacing. I don't think that's healthy for us. But in a person who has a healthy sense of self-concept, they're able to have that pride without throwing someone else under the bus. And one issue that often comes up for me, again, something I also write about, is this idea of what's the difference between self-confidence and narcissism? Aren't narcissistic people just really self-confident? And I'd say absolutely not. A person who's self-confident is self-aware. They're aware of their gifts, their attributes, their strengths, and their weaknesses. And in owning that and being self-reflective, they never, ever, ever need to disrespect someone else, throw them under the bus, or have no respect or have no empathy for them. So in that way that I think self-confidence is the ability to know who you are, but also go through the world in an empathic, responsive way. That's very different from narcissism, which is almost like an empty, insecure acknowledgement of traits and qualities they don't even have, and gifts they don't even have. It's a grandiosity, so it's empty, and it's backed up with such a self-loathing that they feel the need to harm other people to help them feel better about themselves.
Indeed. I've always called it self-esteem. I've kept it pretty simple.
Yeah, self-esteem, but I think it's self-esteem, it's self-reflection, it's self-awareness. I think it's a very when we're talking about sort of this healthy quote-unquote narcissism, again, I think it's more of self-awareness and self-reflection and a self-valuation that comes from the inside out. Listen, even if you're not making lots of money or don't have the big degree or the big title, that doesn't matter. If you can go through the world as a kind, compassionate person, you're a successful person. Sadly, our prevailing wisdom on what success looks like doesn't include those traits. That's a problem with society. That's not a problem with us as individuals.
Well, that's a great segue. So let's talk about this. What is narcissism, and what happens and the effects of its victims?
Yeah. Narcissism is a very misunderstood concept from the jump. So let's start there.
Yeah.
Narcissism is not self-love. We always think like, oh, he's so in love with himself. He's a narcissist. No, it's not. It's self-hate. It's self-loathing. It's emptiness. It's insecurity. It's instability. It's literally the person is like an empty vessel with a hole in the bottom that no matter what you put in, it'll come out the bottom. I often argue that there are certain pillars, key qualities in narcissism that really make it such a toxic disorder. And amongst these are things like lack of empathy, the brutal entitlement, the chronic grandiosity, the superficiality in everything. There is no commitment with these people. They'll show up when they want to, and otherwise they'll stick a knife in your back. The chronic need for admiration and validation. These, again, to me, they're the pillars of narcissism. And another final piece that's harder to gauge is their very unstable sense of self and self-esteem. They change as the wind blows. So when they're having a good day, like in other words, they get an award or something, they're on top of the world. You would think they're the happiest person in the world. And the next day, if something goes wrong, it's an absolute disaster. They're not able to sort of go with the ebbs and flows. It's like they have no internal thermostat of sorts. Those are sort of the core traits. But in my book, what I do is I provide the reader with 30, what I consider to be sort of 30 hallmarks of narcissism. And it goes much broader and wider. We often see traits like vanity, lying, deceit. They're often very greedy. They're very covetous. They're often very miserly or cheap. They're often prone to things like infidelity. Again, it's part of that parcel of that lying. They take pleasure in other people's failures. So it goes bigger and deeper. And I have to say, a lot of the readers have been saying to me, thanks, because it was all this other stuff that is specific to my narcissist. And so it's a very broad, diverse kind of a trait. But what it does to other people is what was most compelling to me. It's what led me to write the book. I mean, a trait is a trait. A pattern is a pattern. What does it do to other people? And what it does, it's almost like they feel empty and it becomes infectious emptiness. After you spend time with these people, you not only feel empty, you feel sick, you start doubting yourself, you sometimes even go so far as to feel ashamed. I mean, they take their shame almost like an infectious disease and plant it in other people. And so it's a really, really complex dynamic when a person's that narcissistic, what they do to other people. And I say, pay attention to how they make you feel. Because if you feel unsettled, you feel less than yourself. You feel like you're not enough. You feel like a sense of self-doubt. You feel like you want to just keep doing more and more to please this person. You very likely are dealing with a narcissist, and you don't have to worry about their traits. Pay attention to how you feel in their presence. But it is a very complex, nuanced set of traits. And I also want to make another distinction, and that's between narcissism and narcissistic personality disorder. I'm very careful as a person who is a licensed psychologist that I cannot diagnose somebody whom I have not met. So you can give me a case, and I can read it, excuse me, but ultimately, I can't diagnose someone I haven't met. So narcissism is a trait set, and a lot of people may not meet the criteria for the full-on disorder, but they'll have a lot of traits of pathological narcissism. And to me, it's a continuum. There are some people out there who are narcissistic. They overtake the dinner table conversation. Everything's about them, and they're sort of annoying, and you roll your eyes at them. At the other extreme are the people who are so brutally cruel and mean that they feel psychopathic. So obviously it is a continuum, and so you may be running into any level of this, and obviously the more brutalizing and the more pathological it is, the more harmful it is to your mental health.
Well, do these narcissists or individuals with narcissistic personality disorder, do they change?
I'm going to say something that is very unorthodox. Narcissists do not change. They don't. And that's, I'm going to hold to that's my party line 100%. There is no incentive for them to change, because why do any of us make a change? We make a change because we reflect on something in ourselves and say, this isn't working out for me. I need to eat more fruits and vegetables. I need to work on being kinder. I need to work on being on time. We reflect on ourselves and say, well, I'm not doing this right. The narcissist has no sense of insight on how they impact other people. So what exactly would be the impetus to change? They think they're just fine. So no, they are not amenable to change. This is very much, and what's tricky with all of the personality disorders is that they're very, very much that person's way of engaging with the world. And so they do not change. And again, that stance means that if you're in a relationship with somebody, whether they're, again, friend, family, partner, whomever they are, whatever's going to happen in this relationship, it's all on you. And so, in other words, do not expect them to rise to the occasion, to say the right thing, that you can teach them to be different. There's no incentive to change, and that there is no change. And so that is something that's hard for people to hear. We live in a culture of hope. We live in a culture of reinvention. We love stories of redemption. I do too. This is one place, though, you're not going to have redemption. I really don't think so. And I've seen very, very few cases of it. Now, one thing we can see in narcissism is changes in behavior. So in other words, you may have someone who is so entitled and so unempathic that they chronically show up to events or meetings or things so late that they throw everybody else off in a really, really, challenging way. Through therapy, we can actually create those kinds of behavioral changes. And we can teach that narcissist using alarms and reminders and self-reflection and all of that to be on time. The problem is now your narcissist is on time, but they're still not listening to you. So the core deficit, the ability to be present, the ability to interact, the ability to be kind, the ability to be respectful, that's not very likely to be taught to somebody who's narcissistic. So as a result, like I said, now you got someone who shows up on time, but they're still not listening to you. You got to wonder, is that really a win? So we can definitely get people to get to those places, but by and large, even after a while, they'll simply say, "This is who I am. Take it or leave it." Again, my wisdom would be that if you hear that, leave it.
Leave it. You said it as I was thinking it. Why do you think it's so important that the narcissist use triangulation? Not only triangulation within the family, but neighbors or friends or Facebook friends. Why is it so important that they have to try desperately to separate their victim from others?
Right. You just raised a critically important dynamic in narcissism. It can be triangulation, it can be called isolation, it can even sometimes be termed splitting. But for them, a narcissist is not psychotic. They're not broken from reality. At some level, they're aware that people around them are kind of are onto their game. And so as a result, once they get a victim, they want to isolate them because they know that other people may weigh in. And remember that the narcissist at the core of themselves is insecure and empty. So they also live in chronic fear of getting called out. So so as a result, by isolating someone, they can make them drink the Kool-Aid. In many ways, the dynamic is very similar to how cult leaders work. They win the person over by telling them how special they are and that no one in the world understands them the way they do. And once they get them over to that kind of rhetoric, they then isolate them from every normalizing influence in their lives. And then the cult member becomes nothing short of a slave. And that's in many ways what narcissism becomes, is a form of slavery. Because you become so isolated, you are beholden to this person sometimes over time for your own self-esteem, because they become your only reality. The problem becomes is that in our society, we have such twisted and skewed views of love and romantic love and all of that, that this idea that there's one great love, and my love encompasses me, and he completes me. I mean, the most dangerous sentence in the world is he completes me. I'm like, that's sick. That's sick. No one else should ever have that function in your life. And so that entire rhetoric about I should be in this great sweeping love, I think it's easy to suck someone into the isolated space, because when you're in that initial courtship phase, you do spend a lot of time with that person. And before you know it, you're isolated and you're so full of self-doubt, you don't want to reach out. And another dynamic that's at play is one of shame. The person in the narcissistic relationship knows something's not quite right here. And yet they're often afraid and ashamed to share with other people what's going on in their life because they're afraid it makes them look weak. In addition, because in some ways a relationship with a narcissist is a little bit like the Stockholm syndrome. There's this weird sense of being in love with your captor, right? And so they will often feel like they don't want to have to defend them. They think this person is okay. Again, you drink the Kool-Aid. And so they don't want to have to defend this person to the world. So it's easier to stay cut off from the world. So I think that the isolation dynamic happens at two levels. It happens not only because the narcissist splits the person, says, hey, that person doesn't have your back, they don't care about you, and they isolate. Narcissists are about power. Alan Rappaport's work on narcissism is very interesting because he focuses very much on the power dynamic in narcissism. And people who are often raised in homes where shame and over-punishing is used as a weapon, they learn that power is how relationships work. And narcissists work entirely from a place of power. And so by isolating people, you're in a better position to use that power card. And again, narcissists don't want to be accountable. So other people, in essence, almost like having a jury around, means that they'll be held accountable. So by isolating a person, they can sort of do what they need to do a lot more efficiently.
I grew up in Brooklyn. We have a kind of a term for that is whack out the witness.
And again,
whack out the witness.
That's exactly it. And that's a beautiful, I mean, and it's sad, it's difficult, hard way to put it, but it is exactly that. It's whack out the witness. That's perfect. And again, we have to tie this to the dynamics of traditional domestic violence or intimate partner violence situations. The dynamics of narcissism are very similar, and in fact, many abusers are narcissistic. You know, that complete lack of empathy, the coldness, and the isolation. So that dynamic is seen across abusive relationships. With a narcissist, again, with just enough awareness to know that I don't need other people weighing in on this. And again, the narcissist values control over all else. Control over schedules, control over their situation, control over their setting. And that's why rich narcissists are so different. Because they can use their money to buy that control.
That was literally my next question. Why do narcissists use money as a tool so very often?
Narcissists use money as a tool because it's efficient. You want to control someone in this world, buy them out. And most people, sadly, can be bought. The narcissists often, I mean, I always view it as sort of like the kind of like what people do when they have a lot of money. They create a lifestyle. And they have a beautiful home, and they can entertain. And, listen, who doesn't like a free party and a free meal? So they can draw people into their sort of thick little universe. And when they do have money, they're able to control family members through fear around inheritance, supporting them in their education. Money is a very powerful tool. And remember, our culture is set up that narcissists are incentivized. It's an incentivized trait. Because when you think about a corporate structure, when you lack empathy, when you're willing to throw other people under the bus, when you're willing to lay off lots of people just to have a bigger bottom line, your shareholders are happy because they're completely cut off from the process, and you make a lot of money. Our economies, let's face it, people in human services, people who work in mental health, teachers, they make the least money of anyone, and yet they're doing the most important work. Why? Because they're empathic. We don't value it in our economy. We value the mean person. We value the person who's willing to break the rules. We value the person who has no empathy and is willing to make the brutal business decisions. When people tell me it's not personal, it's business, I say to them, everything is personal if you're a human being, for God's sake. So, I mean, that's a ridiculous excuse. But in our culture, more than ever, we have become a culture that worships billionaires solely because they have $1 billion. We don't look at their characters. Characters stopped counting a long time ago in the United States. And that's where these chickens have come home to roost, on these narcissists. So many girls and guys, but really girls, are socialized to go for the guy with all the money, who's got the fancy car and the house and can support them. Basically, that's a setup for our daughters to go for the narcissist. Because probabilistically, the guy with all the money and all the stuff and all the fancy toys and the black card and the first-class seats, it's a narcissist. And so we're setting them up, but we're not giving them the skills for how to live a life that's completely devoid of any respect or kindness. If you're going to throw your daughters under that bus, you better prepare them for the emptiness that's going to follow.
So what can a victim do when
Oh,
no?
let me go back. Let me go back to that other. Let me
Yeah,
give you one more
please.
advice to that. Another way that the narcissists use money is that because they often isolate, they'll often lure a person into, I'll take care of you. I've got you. I'm going to cover you. And they will. They'll use the money as a way, in some ways, to hobble that other person. Because now that person, the person in the relationship with the narcissist, is getting their financial needs met. They are no longer becoming viable and employable, and they're losing their sense of self. So it becomes a way of not only control in that way, but then when that person decides, I can't live in this desolation anymore, and they try to go out in the world, the money controls them too, because now they're imprisoned by it. And I can't tell you how many clients I have worked with and people I've interviewed for my book and for other work I've done who keep coming back to, I'm stuck because of the money.
Right.
And they end up having to sometimes spend decades dealing with family members, dealing with siblings, dealing with friends, or dealing with spouses or partners who control them with the money. And they're like, listen, I've gotten used to living a certain lifestyle. I don't know that I'm ready to, because their divorces are expensive. These are very expensive, messy divorces. The narcissists have to win. So sometimes these people know they'll be left with almost nothing. And they're not so sure that they want to give up the lifestyle. And I say, listen, you've made your Faustian deal with the devil then. That this lifestyle is costing you. It's costing you in your soul.
So will you say that the money also has a little bit to do with the development of the golden child?
I think the money can have something to do with the development of the golden child. That's the dynamic of the family, because I think it's dangled out there like a carrot all the time. I think a child by the age of 7 or 8 in our culture realizes that the kid who's got all the toys can often get all the friends, even if they're not a very nice kid. If you've got the cool toys and the cool electronics in the swimming pool, you can be the meanest, nastiest kid, but the other kids will come play with you. That rule applies even when people are 60 years old. I mean, I'll see some of the most raging narcissists go into their older age, and the only reason people still spend time with them is because they have a great beach house or they're able to take them on vacations. Narcissists tend to purchase the people in their lives, and that works for them because for the narcissist, a relationship doesn't have any depth or warmth. In fact, it's so superficial that it makes more sense for them to purchase people. The problem is the people that they purchase are expecting something far more deep and connected. Good luck with that.
Good luck with that, indeed. Does, at any time, or can, the golden child turn into a narcissist?
I think a lot of golden children,
Yeah, sure.
Not all do. It's interesting how, it is, to me, like a lot of people say, well, I had a narcissistic parent. Is that automatically going to make me a narcissist? I say, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Like, obviously, we're all on our own journeys. And sometimes other significant mentors or adults in your life can protect you from that. For example, I'll say somebody has a very narcissistic parent. If they have another adult present who is really, really advocating for them and taking care of them, that can sometimes help squelch some of that effect. So sometimes when you have this sort of golden child dynamic, sometimes the child has a wake-up call, and that may come again through a mentor, to someone else in their lives, where they say, whoa, I kind of know, now that I know what the sausage is made of, I don't want any part of this. However, because the deck gets stacked against the golden child, they're very likely in many cases to become narcissists because they often are raised with a sense of privilege, with a sense of entitlement. They're not taught to check in with the feelings of other people. They're not taught oftentimes to be respectful. They're told you can do no wrong. And I have to say that this is a very interesting international cultural phenomenon. There are many cultures in which the son is the golden child. He can do no wrong, but simply by dint of being a man. And as a result, these men from these cultures are not taught to respect women. In fact, they're often taught to disregard them, or anyone they are told is less than a family who doesn't have as much money or stature in the community or whatnot. And then what happens is they will try to actually, integrate with the rest of us. And we're saying, you don't get to be golden child here. We're a group working on the same project. You're the same as all of us. They can't handle that. And their partners will wonder why this so-called golden child is so unable to engage. And again, that sort of sense of privilege that they were given from the day they were born, that's a really hard thing to shake. You need some specific things. Like, I got to tell you, I personally know some golden children who turned out okay. They turned out okay with a tremendous sense of humility. But when you look at but there were multiple golden children in the family, the majority didn't turn that way. So it can happen, but you need some pretty specific and perfect ingredients in place to avoid that from happening. By and large, the golden child
I did a video once where I suggested, and I feel pretty strongly about it, that the golden child is a victim of abuse as well, and
I agree.
and that the convenience of the narcissist will literally swap golden children and scapegoats at their will. Am I right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Because what ends up happening too, one thing we didn't talk about when we were initially talking about narcissism is that at the bottom line, narcissism is a disorder of self-regulation. And by that, I mean that the narcissist does not know what to do with their own feelings. When they feel angry, it turns into rage. When they feel disappointed, it turns into abject social withdrawal and self-loathing. Like, they can't find this mid-level because, much like an addict, like a drug addict, they don't know how to regulate. Now, the drug addict does it by taking drugs. That's how they regulate. The narcissist does it by having, like, no holds barred, like, sort of all over the map emotionality with little regard for how they affect other people. That's where the golden child, in my estimation, is abused, because they're not given that vocabulary of regulation. And you got to teach the kids. It's very difficult to teach regulation. In fact, it's almost impossible to teach regulation later in life. It really is. And so when we teach these kids this sense of privilege, this sense of entitlement, we don't teach them empathy, and we don't teach them to regulate, we set them up badly for the rest of their lives. And so they're forever doomed to this rage. And many of them, a lot of narcissists, there's a lot of risk for addiction. Because they can't handle their emotions, they'll often they'll start using drugs or alcohol or both. And it's interesting when we see the two of them together, because I've worked with families where they're dealing with both narcissism and addiction in a family member. The addiction will get treated, they'll go to rehab, but sadly, the person is just as mean as ever. And the family is so disappointed. They thought, oh my gosh, we thought when they stopped using, they become nice. And that's when you know you're dealing with a narcissist with an addiction. So even just because you clear the narcissist, now they're a sober mean person versus a drunk mean person is what it comes down to. So we often see those two. Again, it's a regulation issue. And that's where I say these golden children are often doomed, because they don't learn this fundamental skill that all human beings need to learn. And if you don't learn it in a critical window, it's too late.
Let's talk a little bit about the core of your book. Now, I stress, as well as many others, no contact. But that's easy for me to say to someone who cannot go no contact. So what about those individuals? Let's say they're either too young, or due to financial circumstances, they have to go back into their family, or even more so, spouses, where the other spouse controls the money, they control the power, and they cannot afford to pick up and leave, or there's children in the house. What about the people who cannot go no contact? What do you suggest that they do over not only a short period, but a long-term period?
Yeah. I'm so glad you brought that up, because to me, no contact, listen, if you can do it, great. But I think in a pretty hefty proportion of cases, no contact is not possible for all the reasons that you just gave. For example, there's shared children, and the court is requiring a joint custody agreement. There are people you see every day at work. I mean, you don't always have the luxury of going full on no contact, or there's other financial dependency issues. That's why I wrote my book, because it is indeed called Should I Stay or Should I Go? The should I stay part may actually be worth the entire purchase price right there, because the should I stay part gets at, to me, what to do when you can't do no contact, when practically you can't do no contact. It is the most simple recommendation I'll ever make, but it's the core of it, which is simply, you must manage your expectations. It's that simple. Just because you're no longer living in the house with the narcissist doesn't mean they've changed. Now they're just mean and you don't have the same front door. You need to expect that every single interaction is going to be as brutal as the one before. And what that means is you don't need to go in with fists up, but you have to prepare. Narcissism is all about preparation, whether you stay or whether you go. And so it's so easy with narcissists to let your guard down, especially the reason for no contact is because they're so charming. And the idea is that they're either going to get in there, they're going to start criticizing and belittling and bullying and all that, or they're going to become really sweet and you're going to get sucked back in. And I think what happens is that by managing your expectations, and one of the anecdotes I use in the book is this idea of, like, it's winter time right now in much of the country, and I was using Chicago as an example, where one of my best friends lives. And I said, listen, if you walk out of the house in a tank top in February in Chicago, and it's cold, and you don't get to complain about that. You knew this was going to happen. Put a damn coat on. And so to that I say, you know exactly. In fact, the beauty of a narcissist is that for how unpredictable they are, they're very predictable. They're always going to be cold. They're always going to be disrespectful, and they're always going to disappoint you. So prepared with that knowledge, you can manage your expectations. You can have your legal ducks in line. You can talk to your kids very openly. You don't have to throw the other parent under the bus, but you can very openly say, this is what we can expect, and this is what we can't. You do not need to live in a universe of false hope anymore. I think the way that a person can maintain no contact is to give up that false hope. What you see is what you get. This goes back to the idea that this is just bad luck. You stumbled into this person, and it's like a disease you're never quite going to get rid of. And so by managing your expectations, by not allowing yourself to be drawn into false hope, and by recognizing that included in those expectations are that you will be chronically disappointed, that you will be criticized, that you will be mocked. You do the little things. You block them on cell phones. You always build a second birthday party. You always have a second birthday cake. You always have a plan B. By doing all of that, I'm not going to ever say it'll hurt less. It's still going to hurt, but at least you're in better command of it. I've always said that relationships with narcissists always run on the hope of a someday better. That someday better is never going to happen. So you've got to let that go. That's what keeps people in the game. Once you let that go, then I say, why are you still in this? And that's when they say, you're absolutely right. And A, that allows some people to go no contact. And for those who have to maintain it, it allows them to stop throwing themselves under the bus any longer.
I read quite a bit of your blog, and you talk about politics. It's something I don't talk about on my channel, but it's something I have a great deal of passion about. And it seems that every election cycle, I am shaking my head more and more and more and more. It seems, to me at least, that the more cruel, vile, disgusting thing you can say gets people riled up and gets them over to your side. And it's perplexing. So let me ask you quite frankly, what the hell is going on, Doctor?
I'm not perplexed at all. I mean, it's not at all perplexing. Let's face it, elections are often won on name familiarity, for one thing. But what's happening is that we now expect to be entertained chronically around the clock. We no longer talk about issues. We want to be entertained. I mean, Donald Trump, maybe a real estate mogul, but most recently, he's a reality television star.
Right.
Once upon a time, our presidents were, they were learned men. Some had been professors and, attorneys, and they really, they were advocates and they worked in social justice. It's a circus. It's a circus. But the world has become a circus. We value material success above all else. So a lot of the prevailing wisdom is, hey, if you're rich, there must be something good about you. That's not a virtue. So it's then a person with a winning lottery ticket is qualified to be the president. So we want to be entertained. We have become a very superficial world. We are very focused on what do people think of me? What about me? What about me? There's not enough collective buy-in the way there once was, and technology has really played into a lot of it. And I think what's happened is because the media is often going to turn its head to the person who's saying the most ridiculous things, the person who says the most vitriolic, poisonous, awful things gets the lion's share of the attention. Now, as we're watching this election unfold, certainly the Iowa caucuses were fascinating to watch. The fact of the matter is that everyone is saying some really bizarre, hateful things. That's the world we've become. I actually think that the politicians are simply taking the temperature in the room, and they're talking in a language that makes sense to the constituency. As long as we have become a world that is brutally unfair, brutally unkind, we are more Darwinian now than when we were cavemen. It's survival of the fittest. Hey, if you didn't get lucky, if you weren't born with a silver spoon, then to heck with you. Why should I have to help anyone? Why should any of us be compassionate? If you weren't lucky like me, why should I watch out for you? We've become a very cold, very unkind culture. And I think we've made it easy to be unkind. People can sit anonymously behind computer keyboards and say all kinds of terrible things. Where do those awful words come from? They come from an internal emptiness. I've never known a person who has a good, solid sense of who they are throw off insults that easily. I never have. Because why should they? Like, I'm happy in the world. Why should I care that somebody has more or less than me? I'm a happy person. I'm in a good place. I know who I am. The problem is that we're not raising kids to be that way anymore, and we are incentivizing people to be empty. We really are, because then we get to sell more stuff. The more empty people are, the more purses, shoes, houses, cars, and junk they're going to buy. And they just have to keep working harder and living emptier to achieve that goal. So I think the politicians are simply singing a tune that's in a key that everyone wants to hear.
Boy, I couldn't have said that better myself. Thank you. And in closing, if someone feels or somebody knows that they've been a victim of narcissistic abuse, whether they're living with the person, whether they're not living with the person, what do you recommend that they do right off the bat?
I think the first recommendation, I'm always going to have to say, acknowledge it, and acknowledge it from the place of this other person is not going to change. So stop engaging in the futility of doing more. Maybe if I buy him this gift, maybe if I do this for her, maybe if I clean the house this way, maybe if I lose this much weight. No more. If you are loved, you are loved. There's nothing you do should ever bring more love into your life. It is what it is. So if that's not happening, you have to reassess and understand that that person is not going to change. Once you come to that level of acceptance, now comes the practical heavy lifting. I do believe in psychotherapy, but I think with people who are survivors of narcissistic abuse, you have to be in the hands of a deeply skilled therapist who understands this territory. And most people don't. It's almost like being a tour guide, and you're not going to want to take a tour guide to a city you've never been. You're not going to want to use a tour guide who's in a city that they're not familiar with. And if your therapist is not familiar with narcissism and how it works and how it moves, it could end up doing more harm than good. So make sure you research your options, talk to people, whether it's within message boards, other ways that people can help. There are some good books out there. I mean, I don't want to toot my own horn, but yes, mine, and there are other ones that are out there. So read what other people have written, because there's some real good stuff out there. But also, I'm going to say, you must engage in self-care. And I know that sounds so trite. People are like, listen, my world is spinning down around me and you're telling me to meditate. To heck with you. I understand that. But people who have been in relationships with narcissists throughout their lives or for many years, they have learned to stop taking care of themselves. They have so learned to devalue themselves, to stay in this relationship, that they no longer feed themselves. They don't eat well. They don't sleep well. They don't exercise. They don't do anything to take care of themselves. So these are baby steps. I mean, this is just little things like make sure you start building up a support network. And as I always say, when you're with a narcissist, you've gotten so used to taking them good news, like a promotion or something good that's happened to you, and having it mocked and belittled so much so that you're afraid of ever sharing good news with anyone. As I write in the book, the first change you can make from the jump is when you receive good news, never, ever, ever take it to the narcissist in your life. You tell friends, you tell coworkers, you tell your spiritual community, you tell whoever you know will hear it and say, oh my gosh, that's wonderful, and be your cheerleader and celebrate with you. Only then, if you, in an offhanded way, let your narcissist find it out on their own, but don't tell them, because they're going to ruin it. Or by the time you do tell them, make sure you've gotten enough of the support you need that you feel good about this accomplishment. The same thing with the bad news. When something bad happens, never tell the narcissist, because they're going to make you feel worse. They're going to turn a bad situation into a worse situation by not supporting you. So it's really critical that you start building up networks of other people who get it, who get you, who care about you, who respect you, and who have empathy. And that can be done in lots of ways, including going back and dusting off those relationships you got isolated from, and paying attention. You need, and if anyone is giving you a hard time saying, well, you just need to work on it, you may want to shut them out, because they clearly don't get it. But the other thing I want to leave you with, and this is a hard thing to hear, but I still think it's an important one. In the years I've been doing this work, I think the one thing that really, really makes it hard is that people will go tell other people, whether a therapist or someone else, and they'll feel as though their experience is not acknowledged. They're not even getting that sense of like, wow, this was just done to you. You need to understand that your entire reality, you've been gaslit or whatever, but your entire reality has been denied for decades. Just that acknowledgement is curative. And if you're not getting that, whether it's from a mental health person and from others around you who are saying, stop blaming the world, or he's okay, or, writing, and you know what, you don't need that. So once you get that acknowledgement, though, you also don't want to spend your life, just like narcissists blame everyone for their problems, you don't want to go there. So once that acknowledgement is given, now it's time to start taking ownership of your life. And the thing that's going to make this journey the hardest is simple fact, a very simple fact. Life is not fair. It's not. Some people out there got really awful narcissistic parents. That was just a roll of the dice that didn't go your way. Some people chose a partner who was very narcissistic and they became dependent on them. Life happens. Some people get sick at a time of their lives and their lives are shortened. It's funny. I was raised Hindu and we're raised on karma. And there's really no such thing, though, as good things happening to good people and bad things happening to bad people. That's not how the world works. Things simply happen. The world doesn't know if you're good or bad. You simply go through your life and you search for that empathy and you give that empathy, but life is not fair. And I think a lot of people get so lost in that quest for justice. I have people come to me regularly. Please tell me that this narcissist who wrecked my life, please tell me that everything's not going to turn out well for them. And I look at them and gently say, I can't tell you that because they view the world very superficially, very different than you. It may very well look like they have a happy ending. Their Facebook may be full of all kinds of pictures of them riding off into the sunset. That's not your happiness and that's not your story. You've got to lay down that quest for justice because the only justice there is that you go out there and fill your life with good things and live in a place where you give of yourself and that you're surrounded by people who support you, that you follow your dreams and you're not mocked for that, that you can live to your fullest self and not be mocked or belittled or criticized. Keep in mind, too, that a lot of people who are in relationships with narcissists, they themselves will report having significant mental health issues, developing major depression, developing anxiety disorders. I've worked with clients who develop eating disorders in these contexts. Those are frank, severe mental illnesses, and they need help. They need therapy. In some cases, they may need medication. It depends on the nature of the symptoms, but do not let those things go away. And sometimes the damage that these relationships do, they go deep. And those disorders are treatable. And, you can come out of that. I've known people who've had to go into inpatient psychiatric care after coming out of these relationships. It was that damaging. This is not small stuff. And again, this person could have been your parent, it could have been your partner, it could be a boss. I mean, there's a lot of different ways this can rear its head. I do think it's very different when it's a parent of yours, because obviously that feels very much like something that happened to you, versus a partner where you feel like you chose this person. I do agree that those dynamics are quite different and they've been worked on very differently in therapy, but you do not want your narcissist to become your destiny. You do not want them to set you up for a lifetime where you always settle for doubting. And I also want to highlight the fact is that whether it's a narcissistic parent or narcissistic partner or however this comes into your life, don't get lost in this idea, because a lot of narcissism is familiarity. We always gravitate to things that are familiar. That's why some people go on vacation to the same place every year or don't want to move out of their hometown. And I've seen, especially in the relationship space, people who came from very narcissistic homes almost instinctually attempt to recreate a dynamic. And they will go for the narcissistic partner and they'll say, we have so much chemistry, I'll be frank with you. When I hear chemistry, and a colleague of mine educated me on this, she said, that's not chemistry, that's familiarity. And that's familiar, to me, that's old, familiar dysfunction. That dysfunction is so familiar that it feels magical. And I often say, you know what, try a little boredom for a while in your relationship. It may mean that you're finally, sort of getting this right. Relationships should not be dramatic. Relationships shouldn't always be fireworks. And relationships should not make you feel unsettled. There's something to be said for comfort, companionship, kindness, and warmth. So we devalue those traits. I think they're absolutely critical when it comes to a relationship. And I want to sort of leave it on one of the last points I make in my book. When I wrote my book, I had a very interesting experience. Writing about this was really difficult because I'd done tons of interviews and reflected on lots of clinical experiences, and each one of them was more heartbreaking than the one before. I was watching people with incredible potential who had such beautiful voices that had not shared them with the world for lifetimes. And I had the privilege of them coming into my office and sharing with me their dreams. I thought, my God, these people are amazing. And they looked at me and they said, I haven't heard that. And they almost couldn't hear it. So this was a heartbreaking book to write. When I wrote it, I gave it to my editor, a woman who's worked on my first book too, a brilliant editor, and she said, "This is a magnificent book. It has to get in the world." But she said, "It can't end this way." And she said a mouthful. She's not a psychologist. She said a mouthful though, because it's very easy to walk out of these relationships or leave these relationships and forever live under that dark cloud. I always say, once you are able, whether you're able to manage it, whether it's no contact, whether it's just sort of whatever solution you come up with, you have to remember that this relationship did not define you. And this relationship does not have the power to rob you of your compassion and of your gifts and of your inner sense of well-being and happiness. This relationship or these relationships are just episodes in your life. And so towards the end of the book, I would love to read to you the last two paragraphs of the book because I want to leave your listeners with that.
Please do.
I write, toward the end of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, there is a particularly beautiful line. Tolkien writes, "Your time may come. Do not be too sad. You cannot always be torn in two. You will have to be one and whole for many years. You have so much to enjoy and to be and to do." I also reflected on the words of Desmond Tutu, who said, "Forgiving is not forgetting. It's actually remembering. Remembering and not using your right to hit back. It's a second chance for a new beginning. And the remembering part is particularly important, especially if you don't want to repeat what happened. Remember, always remember, keep your heart open, your mind wise, and your soul mindful. Learn from your experiences, but do not let them define you. Your narcissistic relationship had both some beauty as well as challenge, and it is part of the glorious story that is your life. Whether you remain or part ways, wish them and yourself well, because at one point in time in your fashion, you loved them and they loved you. Just because it didn't feel like love, just because it was damaging, in their head it was, don't let that poison the well from which your love emanates for the rest of your life. Do not let that narcissist poison you. Let it go and move on. Life is not fair, but that doesn't mean that you have to live your life under that dark cloud.
Doctor, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I can't tell you what a wonderful conversation this has been, but specifically validating for a great many people. I can tell you that
I hope so.
This itself has, as I know, I am positive, has helped a great many people. I highly recommend your book. And I'm going to have all of the doctor's information, contact information, book information in the links in the description below. And thank you for listening.